There we go. There we are. Hey, Bookworm Angel, how are you? Miss Deborah, good evening. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me. Hi, Tess. Let's see here. Let's get some music on for a little bit while we wait for people to join us. Hopefully that's not too loud. Charlene, Frank, hello everybody. Ishmael, hi. Hi Peggy, hi Janice. Thank you for joining us this evening. For any of you who you know what, Miss Deborah? We are actually kind of getting like the offshoots of the storms. Like we got a tiny bit of rain earlier, but like out west where my mom lives, a little ways out west, they got hammered earlier today apparently with rain, but I guess it kind of skirted around, at least in my area. So we got some, but not a whole lot. But for any of you that are new, welcome. You have stumbled upon a book reading. And this is the series that we are reading from right now. We are into book 2 of the series. For anyone who is following along, if you happen to actually have, this book, we are on chapter 7 of Gathering Blue. So if you want to read along with me, that's where we're at. But we typically wait until about 5 after for people to kind of get logged on and get in their comfy clothes and get their favorite drink. Or just listen to me while you're making dinner or something like that. And if you happen to have missed any of my previous reads, you can actually find them on my YouTube channel. So if you just go to my, profile page here on TikTok, you can just go to the YouTube link, and the book readings are in one of my playlists, and they're just all in sequential order. So you can catch up on any of the readings from this series, and you can also catch up on any of the series that you may have missed from the other books that we've read so far. I think, the last book series had 5 mini books in it. So, I think we've read 6 books so far. 5 or 6, something like that. So, it's not like you'd be super duper behind, but you would have some catching up to do. But thank you guys for joining me. If you are one of my regulars, welcome back. And if you are watching this on YouTube later, hello. You should come join us for the lives on Mondays. So we are always going to be reading Monday nights from 8 to 9. Sometimes it's been 8 to 9:30, depending on where we are in a story and how, big or small some of the chapters are in the books. So, but yeah, come join us on TikTok Live. It's fun, and we can comment, we can interact, we can talk, and we can chill for a little bit before I start reading. And I am probably going to be clearing my throat more than I want to, but I went for a run earlier today, and the pollen is pollinating at the moment. I had to cut my run short because I was gagging, man. I was gonna die. I was like, it's like breathing in dust, sticky dust. I hate it. It's the one thing about spring that I don't like. I guess I could always run with a mask on, but then it might be hard to breathe just because it'd be hot, you know what I mean? So, oh well. These are our first world problems, and I shouldn't complain. But to do a quick volume test, can you guys give me like thumbs up or let me know if you should be able to hear me fine, but just in case you can't, let me know. For anyone who's new, joining in just recently, welcome, hello, we are so glad you're here. Hi Claire, how are you? Sound is good? Okay, thanks Miss Deborah. Okay, cool, very good, very good. All right, well, it is 8:05, so we're gonna go ahead and get started with our reading. And like I said, if you're following along, we're currently in the second book, Gathering Blue, and we're on, oh, did I miss the hat and mustache? I think I did. But we are on chapter 7. So here we go. An egg! That was a treat. In addition to the boiled egg, her breakfast tray contained more of the thick bread and a bowl of warm cereal swimming in cream. Kira yawned and ate. Usually at waking, she and her mother had walked to the stream. Here, she supposed, the green tiled room took its place, but Kira was nervous about the room. She had entered it the night before and turned to the various gleaming handles. Some of the water was hot and startled her. It must be for cooking. Somewhere below, a fire had apparently been built. Somehow the cooking water had been hoisted here, but what was she to do with it? There was no need for her to cook, Kira thought this morning, as she had last night. Warm prepared food had been brought. Mystified still, Kira turned her attention this morning to the long, low tub. Jameson had suggested that she could wash Matt there. There was something that looked and smelled like soap. Leaning forward over the tub's rim, she tried to wash, but the procedure was awkward and unnatural. It was easier in the stream. And she could wash her clothes in the stream and hang them on the bushes. Here, in this small, windowless room, there was no place to dry anything. No breeze. No sun. It was interesting, Kira decided, that they had found a way for water to enter the building, but impractical and unsanitary, and there was no place to bury waste. She wiped the cold water from her face and hands with the cloth she found in the tiled room and decided that she would return to the stream each day to attend to her needs properly. She dressed quickly, laced her sandals, pulled the wooden comb through her long hair, grabbed her stick, and hurried through the empty corridor to leave her new home and go for a morning walk. But before she had gone very far, a door in the corridor opened. A boy she recognized emerged and spoke to her. "Kira the Threader," he said. "They told me you would come." "You're the carver," she said. "Jameson told me you were here." "Yes, I'm Thomas." He grinned at her. He seemed about her age, not long into 2 syllables, and was a good-looking boy with clear skin and bright eyes. His hair was thick and reddish-brown. A chip in one front tooth showed when he smiled. "This is where I live," he explained. He opened the door wider so that she could see inside. His room was just like hers, though on the opposite side of the corridor, his window view was to the wide central square. She noticed, too, that his room seemed more of a lived-in place. His things were strewn around. "This is my workroom, too." He gestured, and she could see a large table with his carving tools and scraps of wood. "And there's a storage room for supplies," he pointed. "Yes, mine's the same," Kira told him. "My supply room has lots of drawers. I haven't started work yet, but there's a table under the windows, and the light is good there. I think that's where I'll do the threading." "And there, that door? That's your cooking water and your tub?" Kira asked him. "Do you use it? It seems such a bother when the stream's so nearby." "The tenders will show you how it works," he explained. "Tenders?" "The one who brought you food? That's a tender. They'll help you however you want, and a guardian will be checking on you every day." Good. Thomas seemed to know how things worked. It would be a help, Kira thought, because it all seemed so new, so foreign. "Have you lived here a long time?" she asked politely. "Yes," he replied, "since I was quite young." "How did it happen that you came here?" The boy frowned, thinking back. "I had just begun carving. I was a very little tyke, but somehow I had discovered that if I took a sharp tool and a piece of wood, I could make pictures. Everyone thought it was quite amazing." He laughed. "I guess it was." Kira laughed a little too, but she was remembering herself, very small, finding that her fingers had a kind of magic to them when she held the colored threads, seeing her mother's astonishment. and the look on the face of the guardian. It must have been the same, she thought, for this boy. Somehow the guardians heard about my work. They came to our cot and admired it. So similar, Kira thought. Then, Thomas continued, not long after, my parents were both killed during a storm, struck by lightning, both at once. Kira was shocked. She had heard of trees felled by lightning, but not people. The people didn't go out during thunderstorms. Were you there? How did you stay safe? No, I was alone at the cot. My parents were doing an errand of some sort. I remember that a messenger had been sent for them, but then some guardians came and got me and told me of their deaths. It was fortunate that they knew of me and felt that my work was of value, even though I was still small. Otherwise, I would have simply been given away. But instead, they brought me here. I've been here ever since. He gestured around the room. For a long time, I practiced and learned, and I've made ornaments for many of the guardians. Now, though, I do real work. Important work. He pointed, and she could see that a long piece of wood was resting against the table, leaning in the same way that she had leaned her walking stick. But this stick was intricately decorated, and from the shavings on the table she could tell that the boy had been working on it. They've given me wonderful tools, Thomas told her. Outside, the bell rang. Kira was disconcerted. Back in the cot, the sound of the bell meant that it was time to go to work. Should I go back to my quarters? She asked. I was going to walk to the stream. Thomas shrugged. It doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want. There are no real rules, only that you are required to do the work you were brought here for. They'll check on your work every day. I'm going out now to visit my mother's sister. She has a new tyke, a girl. Look, I'm taking a toy. He reached into his pocket and showed Kira an intricately carved bird. It was hollow. He held it to his mouth and made it whistle. I made it yesterday, he explained. It took time from my regular work, but not much. It was easy to do. I'll be back for lunch, he added, because I have work to do this afternoon. Shall I bring my lunch tray to your quarters so that we can eat together? Kira agreed happily. And look, he said, here comes the tender who'll pick up the morning trays. She's very nice. You ask her... No, wait, I'll ask her. While Kira watched curiously, Thomas approached the tender and spoke briefly to her. She nodded. You follow her back to your quarters, Kira, Thomas said. You don't need to go to the stream. She'll explain the bathroom to you. See you at lunch. He put the little carved bird into his pocket, closed the door to his room, and headed down the corridor. Kira followed the tender back the way she had come. Jameson came to her room shortly after lunch. Thomas had eaten and hurried away to his quarters to resume work. Kira had just gone into the small room lined with drawers and slid open the one containing the singer's robe. She had not yet unfolded it. She had never been permitted to touch it before, and was in awe now and a little nervous. She was staring down at the lavishly decorated fabric, remembering her mother's deft hands holding the bone needle, when she heard the knock on her door and then heard Jameson come in. Ah, he said, the robe. I was thinking that I must soon begin my duties, Kira told him, but I'm almost afraid to start. This is so new to me. He lifted the robe from the drawer and carried it to the table by the window. There in the light, the colors were even more magnificent, and Kira felt even more inadequate. Are you comfortable here? You slept well? They brought your food? It was good? So many questions. Kira considered whether to tell him how restlessly she had slept and decided against it. She glanced at the bed to see if the bed coverings would reveal her tossing and noticed for the first time that someone, probably the tender who brought and took away the food, had smoothed everything so that there was no sign that the bed had been used at all. Yes, she told Jameson, thank you, and I met Thomas the carver. He ate his lunch with me. It was nice to have someone to talk to. And the tender explained things I needed to know, she added. I thought the hot water was for cooking. I never used hot water just for washing before. He wasn't paying attention to her embarrassed explanation about the bathroom. He was looking carefully at the robe, sliding his hand across the fabric. Your mother made minor repairs each year, but now it must all be restored. This is your job. Kira nodded. I understand, she said, though she didn't. Not really. This is the entire story of our world. We must keep it intact. More than intact. She saw that his hand had moved and was stroking the wide, unadorned section of fabric, the section of the cloth that fell across the singer's shoulders. The future will be told here, he said. Our world depends upon the telling. Your supplies, they are adequate? There is much to be done here. Supplies? Kira remembered that she had brought a basket of her own threads. Looking now at the magnificent robe, she knew that her sparse collection, a few leftover colored threads that her mother had allowed her to use for her own, was not adequate at all. Even if she had the skill, and she was not at all certain that she did, she could never restore the robe with what she had brought. Then she remembered the drawers that she had not yet opened. I haven't looked yet, she confessed. Then she went to the shallow drawers that he pointed out to her yesterday. They were filled with rolled white threads in many different widths and textures. There were needles of all sizes and cutting tools laid neatly in a row. Kira's heart sank. She had hoped that perhaps the threads would already be dyed. Glancing back at the robe on the table at its wide array of hues, she felt overwhelmed. If only her mother's threads had been saved. But they were all gone. All burned. She bit her lip and looked nervously at Jameson. They're not colored, she murmured. You said your mother had been teaching you to dye, he reminded her. Kira nodded. She had implied that, but it had not been completely true. Her mother had planned to teach her. I still have much to learn, she confessed. I learn quickly, she added, hoping that it didn't sound vain. Jameson looked at her with a slight frown. I will send you to Annabella, he told her. She is far in the woods, but the path is safe, and she can finish the teaching that your mother started. The ruin song is not until autumn start, he pointed out. That's still several months away. The singer won't need the robe until then. You'll have plenty of time. Kira nodded, uncertainly. Jameson had been her defender. Now it seemed he was her advisor. Kira was grateful for his help. Still, she sensed an edge, an urgency to his voice that had not been there before. When he left her room, after pointing out a cord on the wall that she could pull if she needed anything, Kira looked again at the robe displayed on the table. So many colors, so many shades of each color. Despite his reassurance, autumn start was not that far away. Today, Kira decided she would examine the robe and plan. Tomorrow, first thing, she would find Annabella and plead for help. Chapter 8. Matt wanted to come. You be needing me and Branch for protectors, he said. Them woods is full of fierce creatures. Kira laughed. Protectors? You? Me and Branchy? Us is tough, Matt said. He flexed what passed for muscles in his scrawny arms. I only look wee. Jameson said it was safe as long as we stay on the path, Kira reminded the boy. Secretly, she thought it would be fun to have both of them, boy and dog, for company. But suppose you was to get lost, Matt said. Me and Branch can find our way out of anywheres. You be needing us for certain if and you get lost. But I'll be gone all day. You'll get hungry. Triumphantly, Matt pulled a thick wad of bread from the voluminous pocket of his baggy shorts. Filched this crusty from the baker, he announced with pride. So the boy won, to Kira's delight, and she had company for the journey into the forest. It was about an hour's walk. Jameson was correct. There seemed to be no danger. Although thick trees shaded the path and they could hear rustling in the undergrowth and unfamiliar cries of strange forest birds. Nothing seemed threatening. Now and then, Branch chased a small rodent or nosed about an opening in the earth, frightening whatever small animal made its home there. Probably there be snakies all in here, Matt told her with a mischievous smile. I'm not afraid of snakes. Most girls be. Not me. There were always small snakes in my mother's garden. She said they were friends to the plants. They ate bugs. Like Branchy. Look, he catched him one now. Matt pointed. His dog had pounced upon an unlucky creature with long, thin legs. That be called a daddy longlegs. Daddy Longlegs? Kira laughed. She'd not heard the name before. Do you have a father? She asked the boy curiously. Nah, did once, but now me mum is all I got. What happened to your father? He shrugged. Dunno. In the fen, he added, things is different. Many gots no pa, and then them that's got them, they be scared of 'em, 'cause they hit something horrid. Me mum hits too, he added with a sigh. I had a father. He was a fine hunter, Kira told him proudly. Even Jameson said so. But my father was taken by beasts, she explained. Aye, I heard that. She could see Matt was trying to look sad for her benefit, but it was difficult for a boy whose temperament was so merry. Already he was pointing at a butterfly, gleeful at the bright spotted orange of its wings in the dim forest light. You see this? You brought it with my mother's things, remember? She lifted the rock pendant from her neck of her shift. Matt nodded. It be all purply and shiny-like. Kira dropped it back gently inside her clothing. My father made it as a gift for my mother. Matt wrinkled his face, thinking that over. Gift? He asked. Kira was startled that he didn't understand. When you care about someone and give them something special, something that they treasure, that's a gift. Matt laughed. In the fen, they don't have that, he said. In the fen, if'n they give you something special, it be a kick in your buddy. But that's a pretty thing you got, he added politely. You be lucky I saved it. It was a long journey for Kira, dragging her twisted leg. Her stick caught at roots knotted under the earth of the path, and she stumbled from time to time, but she was accustomed to the awkwardness and the ache. They had always been with her. Matt had run ahead with Branch, and they returned to her, excited, announcing that the destination was just around the next curve. A wee cot it is, he called, and there's the crone outside in the garden, with her crookedy hands full of rainbow. Kira hurried along, rounded the curve, and understood what he meant. In front of the tiny hut, a bent and white-haired old woman was working near a lush flower garden. She leaned toward a basket on the ground, lifted handfuls of bright-colored yarns, yellow of various shades, from the palest lemon to a deep tawny gold, and hung them across a rope that was strung from one tree to another. Deeper shades of rust and red were already hanging there. The woman's hands were gnarled and stained. She lifted one in greeting. She had few teeth, and her skin was folded into wrinkles, but her eyes were unclouded. She walked nearer to them, gripping a cane made of wood and seeming unsurprised by the sudden visitors. She peered intently at Kira's face. You liken your mum, she said. You know who I am? Kira asked, puzzled. The old woman nodded. My mother has died. I knowed it. How? How did you know? But Kira didn't ask. I'm called Kira. This is my friend. His name is Matt. Matt stepped forward, suddenly a little shy. I brung my own crusty, he said. Me and my doggie, we be no trouble to you. Sit, the woman named Annabella said to Kira, ignoring Matt and Branch, who was busily sniffing the garden, looking for the right place to lift his stubby leg. Doubtless you be weary and pained. She gestured toward a low, flattened tree stump, and Kira sank down gratefully, rubbing her aching leg. She unlaced her sandals and emptied them of the pebbles. You must learn the dyes, the old woman said. You come for that, aye? Your mum did, and she was to teach you. There wasn't time, Kira sighed, and now they want me to know it all, and do the work, the repairing of the singer's robe. You know about that? Annabella nodded. She returned to the drying rope and finished hanging the yellow strands. I can give you some threads, she said, to start the repair, but you must learn the dyes. There are other things they'll want of you. Kira thought again of the untouched expanse across the back and shoulders of the robe. It was what they would want of her, to fill that space with future. You must come here each day. You must learn all the plants. Look, The woman gestured at the garden plot, thick with thriving plants, many in summer start bloom. Bedstraw, she said, pointing to a tall plant massed with golden blossoms. The roots give good red. Madder's better for reds, though. There's my madder over behind. She pointed again, and Kira saw a sprawling, weedy plant in a raised bed. 'Tis the wrong time to make the madder roots now. Fall starts better, when it lies dormant. Bedstraw, madder. I must remember these. I must know these. Dyer's green weed, the woman announced, poking with her cane at a shrub with small flowers. Use the shoots for a fine yellow. Don't move it, though. Lesson you must. Green weed don't want to transplant. Green weed for yellow. Kira followed the woman as she rounded a corner of the garden. Annabella stopped and poked at a clumped plant with stiff stems and small oval leaves. Here's a tough fellow, she said almost affectionately. St. John's wort, he's called. No blooms yet. It's too early for him. But when he blooms, you can get a lovely brown from his blossoms. Stay in your hands, though. She held up her own hands and cackled with laughter. Then, you'll be needing greens. Chamomile can give you that. Water is good, but take just the leaves for your green color. Save the blossoms for tea. Kira's head was already spinning with the effort to remember the names of the plants and the colors they would create, and only a small corner of the lavish garden had been described. Now, at the sound of the word water, and also tea, she realized that she was thirsty. Please, do you have a well? Might I have a drink? She asked. And Branchy, too? He's been looking for a stream but found naught. Matt's voice piped beside Kira. She had almost forgotten that he was there. Annabella led them to her well behind the cot, and they drank gratefully. Matt poured water into the crevice of a curved rock for his dog, who lapped eagerly and waited for more. Finally, they sat together in the shade, Kira and the old woman, Annabella. Matt, knowing his bread, wandered off with Branch at his heels. You must come each day, Annabella repeated. You must learn all the plants, all the colors, as your mum did when she was a girl. I will, I promise. She said you had the knowledge in your fingers, more than she did. Kira looked at her hands, folded in her lap. Something happens when I work with the threads. They seem to know things on their own, and my fingers simply follow. Annabella nodded. That be the knowledge. I got it for the colors, but never for the threads. My hands was always too coarse. She held them up, stained and misshapen. But to use the knowledge of the threading, you must learn the making of the shades, when to sadden with the iron pot, how to bloom the colors, how to bleed. To sadden, to bloom, to bleed. What a strange set of words. And the mordants, too. You must learn those. Sometimes sumac. Tree galls are good. Some lichens. Best is... Here, come, let me show you. See you make a guess to its birthplace, this mordant. With surprising agility for a woman of 4-syllable age, Annabella rose and led Kira to a covered container near the place where a large kettle of dark water, too huge for cooking food, hung above the smoldering remains of an outdoor fire. Kira leaned forward to see, but when Annabelle lifted the lid, she jerked her head back in unpleasant surprise. The smell of the liquid was terrible. Annabella laughed, a delighted cackle. Got you a guess? Kira shook her head. She couldn't imagine what was in the foul-smelling container or what its origin might be. Annabella replaced the lid, still laughing. You save it and age it good, she said. Then it brings the hue to life and sets it firm. Pausing real quick. Anyone who knows anything about dye, just say to yourself if you know what the ingredient is. All right. It's old piss, she explained with a satisfied chuckle. Late in the day, Kira set out for home with Matt and Branch. The bag she carried over her shoulder was filled with colored threads and yarns that Annabella had given to her. These'll do for you now. Yes, the old dyer had said, but you must learn to make your own. Say back to me now, those you keep in mind. Kira closed her eyes, thought, and said them aloud. Madder for red, bedstraw for red too, just the roots. Tops of tansy for yellow, and greenwood for yellow too. And yarrow, yellow and gold. Dark hollyhocks, just the petals, for mauve. Snotweed, Matt said loudly with a grin and wiped his own runny nose on his dirty sleeve. Hush, you, Kira said to him, laughing. Don't play foolish now. It's important I remember. Broom sedge, she added, still remembering. Goldy yellows and browns, and St. John's wort for browns too, but it'll stain my hands. And bronze fennel, leaves and flowers. Use them fresh, and you can eat it too. Chamomile for tea and for green hues. That's all I remember now, Kira said apologetically. There had been so many others. Annabella nodded in approval. It's a starting, she said. Matt and I must go, or it will become dark before we're back, Kira said, turning. Looking at the sky to assess the time, she suddenly remembered something. Can you make blue? She asked. But Annabella frowned. You need the woad, she said. Gather fresh leaves from first year's growth of woad, and soft rainwater. That makes the blue. She shook her head. I have not. Others do, but they be far away. Who be others? Matt asked. The old woman didn't answer the boy. She pointed toward the far edge of her garden, where the woods begin, and there seemed to be a narrow, overgrown path. Then she turned toward her hut. Kira heard her speak in a low voice. I ne'er could make it, she was saying, but some have blue yonder. I swear, I should just have a straw for as many times as I miss my mouth. Oh well. Chapter 9. The singer's robe contained only a few tiny spots of ancient blue, faded almost to white. After her supper, after the oil lamps had been lit, Kira examined it carefully. She lay her threads, the ones from her own small collection and the many others that Annabella had given her, on the large table, knowing that she would have to match the hues carefully in daylight before she began the repairs. It was then that she noticed, with relief because she would not know how to repair it, and with disappointment because the color of sky would have been such a beautiful addition in the pattern, that there was no real blue anymore, only a hint that there once had been. She said the names of the plants over and over aloud, trying to make a chant of them for easier memory. Hollyhock and tansy, madder and bedstraw, but they fell into no comfortable rhythm and did not rhyme. Thomas knocked at her door. Kira greeted him happily, showed him the robe and threads, and told him of her day with the old dyer. I can't remember all the names, she said in frustration, but I'm thinking that if in the morning I go back to where my old cot was, maybe my mother's garden plants, the ones she used for colors, will still be there. And then, seeing them, the names will mean more. I only hope Vendara... She paused. She had not told the carver about her enemy, and even saying the name made her apprehensive. The woman with the scar? Thomas asked. Kira nodded. Do you know her? He shook his head. But I know who she is, he said. Everyone does. He picked up a little skein of the deep crimson. How did the dyer make this? He asked curiously. Kira thought. Madder for red. Madder, she recalled, just the roots. Madder, he repeated. Then an idea occurred to him. I could write the names for you, Kira, he suggested. It would make the remembering easier. You can write? And read? Thomas nodded. I learned when I was young. Boys can, the ones who were chosen. And some of the carving I do has words. But I can't. So even if you were to write the names, I couldn't read them. And it's not permitted for girls to learn. Still, I could help you in the remembering. If you told them to me and I wrote them, then I could read them to you. I know it would help. She realized he was probably right. So he brought pen and ink and paper from his quarters, and once again she said the words, those she could recall. In the flickering light, she watched as he carefully wrote them down. She saw how the curves and lines in combinations made the sounds, and that he was then able to say them back to her. When he read the word hollyhock aloud with his finger on the word, she saw that it was long, with many lines like tall stems. She turned her eyes away quickly so that she would not learn it, would not be guilty of something clearly forbidden to her. But it made her smile to see it, to see how the pen formed the shapes, and the shapes told a story of a name. Very early in the morning, Kira ate quickly and then walked to the place where her mother's color garden had been. Few people were up and about yet, at sunrise. She half expected to encounter Matt and Branch, but the paths were mostly empty and the village was still quiet. Here and there a tyke cried, and she could hear the soft clucking of chickens, but the noisy clangor of daytime life was yet to come. Approaching, she could see the pen was already partly built. It had been only a few days, but the women had gathered thorn bushes and circled them around the remains of the cot where Kira had grown up. The encircled ground was still ashes and rubble. Very soon the thorned fence they were building would enclose the area completely. She supposed they would create some kind of gate, and then they would shove their chickens and their tykes inside. There would be sharp wood pieces and jagged fragments of broken pots. Kira sighed, seeing it. The tykes would be scratched and splintered by scraps of her own destroyed past. But there was nothing she could do. She edged quickly past the wreckage and the half-built fence, and found the remains of her mother's color garden at the edge of the woods. The vegetable garden was completely stripped, but the flower plot remained though its plants were trampled. Clearly the women, dragging their bushes to build the pen, had simply walked across the area. Yet the blossoms continued to bloom, and she was awed to see that vibrant life still struggled to thrive despite such destruction. She named them to herself, those she remembered, and picked what she could, filling the cloth she had brought. Annabella had told her that most of the flowers and leaves could be dried and used later. Some, like bronze fennel, should not. Use it fresh, Annabella had said of the fennel. You could eat it, too. Kira left it where it grew and wondered if the women would know that it could be harvested for food. A dog barked nearby, and now she could hear arguing. A hubby shouting at his wife, a tyke being slapped. The village was waking to its routine. It was time for her to go. This was not her place anymore. Welcome to everybody who's new. I hope you're enjoying the reading so far. Kira gathered the cloth around the plants that she had collected and tied the edges together. Then she slung it over her shoulder, picked up her walking stick, and hurried away. On a back path, avoiding the central lane of the village, Kira saw Vendara and averted her eyes. The woman called her name in a smug, taunting voice. "Liking your new life?" she called, and followed the question with a harsh laugh. Quickly, Kira turned a corner to escape a confrontation, but the memory of the sarcastic question and the woman's smirk accompanied her home. "I'll need a place to grow a color garden," she told Jameson hesitantly a few days later, "and an airy place for drying the plants. Also a place where a fire can be built, and pots for the dyeing." She thought some more, then added, "and water." He nodded and said that such things could be provided. He came each evening to her quarters to assess her work and to ask her needs. It seemed strange to Kira that she could make requests and to have them answered. But Thomas said it had always been so for him too. The kinds of wood, ash, heartwood, walnut, or curly maple, each had been brought when he asked, and they had given him tools of all sorts, some he had not known of before. The days, busy ones, tiring ones, began to pass. One morning, as Kira prepared to go to the dyer's hut, Thomas came to her room. "Did you hear anything last night?" he asked her uncertainly. "Maybe a sound that woke you?" Kira thought. "No," she told him. "I slept soundly. Why?" He seemed puzzled, as if he were trying to remember something. "I thought I heard something, a sound like a child crying. I thought it woke me, but maybe it was a dream. Yes, I guess it was a dream." He brightened and shrugged off the little mystery. "I've made something for you," he told her. "I've been doing it in the early mornings," he explained, "before I started my regular work." "What is your usual work, Thomas?" Kira asked. Mine's the robe, of course. But what have they set you to do? The singer's staff. It's very old, and his hands, and the hands of other singers in the past, I suppose, have worn the carvings down, so it must be all recarved. It's difficult work, but important. The singer uses the carvings of the staff to find his place, to remind him of the sections in the song. And there's a large place at the top that has never been carved. Eventually, I'll be doing that, carving it for the first time, making my own designs. He laughed. Not my own, really. They'll tell me what to put there. Here. Shyly, Thomas reached into his pocket and handed her the gift. He had made her a small box with a tight-fitting lid, its top and sides intricately carved in the pattern of the plants she was beginning to learn and to know. She examined it with delight. She recognized the tall spikes of yarrow and its dense, clustered blossoms. Around them twined the flopping stems of coreopsis, above a carved base of what plants mounded dark and feathery leaves. She knew instantly what she wanted to place in the exquisite box, the small scrap of decorated cloth that she had carried in her pocket on the day of the trial, and that comforted her loneliness when she held it before sleeping, was hidden away in one of the drawers that contained supplies. She no longer carried it with her because she feared losing it during her long walks through the woods and her long days hard at work with the dyer. Now, with Thomas watching, she fetched the scrap and laid it in the box. "It's a lovely thing," he said, seeing the small cloth. Kira stroked it before she closed the lid. "It speaks to me somehow," she told him. "It seems almost to have life." She smiled, embarrassed, because she knew it was an odd thing, and that he would not understand and could perhaps find her foolish. But Thomas nodded. "Yes," he said to her surprise, "I have a piece of wood that does the same, one I carved long ago when I was just a tyke. And sometimes I feel it in my fingers still, the knowledge that I had then." He turned to leave. "That you had then? No more? The knowledge doesn't stay?" Kira was dismayed at the thought, but she said nothing to her friend. Though there was still so much information she needed to acquire from Annabella, Kira was forced to make her learning time at the dyer's cot shorter because it was important to begin work on the singer's robe, and she needed the daylight. She was glad now of the tiled bathroom that had caused her such confusion at first. The warm water and soap helped to rid her hands of stains, and it was vital that her hands be clean when she touched the robe. She still had her small frame, the one that Matt had saved from the fire, but there was no need of it. Among the supplies provided for her was a fine new frame that unfolded and stood on sturdy wooden legs, so that it was not necessary to hold it in her lap. She placed the frame by the window so she could sit in a chair beside it while she worked. She spread out the robe on the large table to examine it carefully and select the place where she should begin her work. Now, for the first time, Kira began to perceive the vastness from which the singer created his song. The entire history of the people, culminating with the horrifying story of the ruin, was portrayed with immense complexity on the voluminous folds of the robe. I have such a hard time with that word. Voluminous. None of that sounded right. Kira could see pale green sea, and in its depths fish of all kinds, some larger than men, larger than 10 men together. Then the sea blended imperceptibly into sweeping areas of land populated only by the figures of animal life unknown to her, hulking creatures grazing on tall, tan grasses. All of this was only one small corner of the singer's robe. As her eyes moved along, she saw that out of the pale sea, nearing the grazing land, rose another land, and on this land appeared men. The tiny stitches created figures of hunters with spears and weaponry, and she saw the little knots of red, matter for red, just the roots, had been used to color blood on the figures of fallen men, those taken by beasts. She thought of her father, but this scene was long ago, long before her father, long before any of their people. The lifeless men dotted with the red knots of blood were still an infinitesimal section of the robe, a blink of an eye, forgotten now except for the once-a-year song, the time that the singer reminded them of the past. Looking at the robe and smoothing it with her washed hands, Kira sighed and realized that she did not have much time for study. There was important work to be done, and she had noticed Jameson's increasing sense of urgency. Again and again he came to her room, checking, making certain that she was attentive to her job and would be meticulous in the work. Identifying a place on one sleeve that badly needed repair, Kira moved that section of the robe into the frame, which held it taut. Then, carefully, using the delicate cutting tools that she had been given, Kira snipped away the frayed threads. There was a small stain across an intricately threaded flower in shades of gold, part of a landscape that portrayed rows of tall sunflowers near a pale green stream. Someone, long ago, someone skilled in the art, had made the stream appear to flow by stitching white curving lines that gave a sense of foam. How gifted the earlier threader had been! But those stained threads would need to be replaced. The work was painstakingly slow. Her mother, though her fingers had not had the almost magical knowledge that Kira's had, would have been more experienced, more deft, and faster. She held the new gold threads to the window and examined the subtle shifts in hue, choosing just the right ones for repair. When the late afternoon light began to dim, Kira stopped work. She looked at the few stitches in the frame, assessing what she had accomplished, and decided that she was doing well. Her mother would have been pleased. Jameson would be pleased. She hoped that when the time came to don the robe, the singer would be satisfied as well. But her fingers ached. Kira rubbed them and sighed. This was not at all the same as her own threadings, the small pieces she had done throughout her childhood. It was certainly not like the special one that had begun to move of its own volition in her hand beside her mother's deathbed, to twist and mix the threads in ways that she had never learned, to form patterns she had never seen. Her hands had never tired then. Thinking of that special scrap, Kira went to the carved box, unfolded the bit of cloth, and put it in her pocket. It felt familiar and welcome there, as if a friend had come to visit. It was almost time for her evening meal to be brought. Kira covered the spread-out robe with a plain cloth to protect it. Then she went along the corridor and knocked on Thomas's door. The young carver was also just finishing his work. When he called, "Come in," Kira entered and saw that he was wiping the blades of his tools and putting them away. The long staff lay across his work table, held in a clamp. He smiled when he saw her. They had begun to eat their evening meal together each night. "Listen," Thomas said, and pointed to his windows. She could hear noise coming from the central plaza below. Her own room, facing the forest, was always quiet. "What's happening?" "Take a look. They're preparing for a hunt tomorrow." Kira moved to the window and looked down. Below, the men were gathering for the distribution of weapons. Hunts always began early in the morning. The men left the village before sunrise. But this was preparation. Kira could see that doors had been opened in an outbuilding beside the council edifice, and from the storage place, long spears were being brought and placed in piles in the center of the plaza. Men were lifting the spears, testing the weight, looking for the one that felt right. There were arguments. She saw two men with their hands grasping the same spear shaft, each determined to hold on. They were yelling at each other. In the midst of the noisy chaos, Kira saw a small figure dart in among the men and grab a spear. No one else seemed to notice. They were all absorbed with themselves, shoving and pushing. She saw that one man was already bloodied from a spear point, and it was clear that others would be injured before the disorganized distribution was complete. No one paid any attention to the boy. From her place in the window, Kira watched as the figure, holding an undisputed spear, moved triumphantly to the side of the crowd. A dog scampered by his bare feet. "It's Matt!" Kira cried in dismay. "He's just a tyke, Thomas. He's much too young for a hunt." When Thomas came to the window, she pointed. He followed her finger, and finally saw Matt where he stood to the side with his spear. Thomas chuckled. "Sometimes boy tykes do that," he explained. "The men don't care. They let them follow along on the hunt." "But it's too dangerous for a tyke, Thomas." What do you care?" Thomas seemed genuinely curious. "They're only tykes. There are too many of them anyway." "He's my friend." He seemed to comprehend then. She saw his face change. He looked down toward the boy with concern. Kira could see that now Matt was encircled by the pack of mischief makers who were often at his side. They were admiring him as he brandished the spear. Kira felt a startling sensation, a throbbing in her hip. She reached for it, intending to rub it away, thinking that perhaps she had leaned too hard against the windowsill. Then her hand went instinctively to her pocket. She remembered that she had placed the scrap of cloth there. She touched the fabric and felt tension, danger, and a warning from it. "Please, Thomas," Kira said urgently, "help me stop him." Oh man, we have time for one more chapter. Chapter 10. It was difficult to get through the crowd. Kira followed Thomas, who was taller than she, and as he pushed to make a path through the shouting, raucous men. She recognized some. The butcher was there, cursing as he argued with another man, and she could see her mother's brother too, in a group comparing the weights of their weapons with loud, bragging comments. Kira had not been much in the world of men. They led very separate lives from those of women. She had never envied them. Now, as she found herself jostled by their thick, sweat-smelling bodies, as she heard their muttered, angry comments and their shouts, she found herself both frightened and annoyed. But she realized that this was hunt behavior, a time for flaunting and boasting, a time for testing each other. No wonder Matt, with his childish swagger, wanted to be a part of it. A light-haired man with blood smeared on his arm turned from a shoving match and grabbed at her as she hurried by. "Here's a trophy," she heard him call out, but his companions were preoccupied with their argument. Using her walking stick as a prod, she pushed the man away and wrenched her wrist free from his grasp. "You shouldn't be here," Thomas whispered when she caught up with him. They had almost reached the side of the square where they had last spotted Matt. "It's always only men, and at hunt time they act brutish." Kira knew that. She could tell from the smell, the coarse quarreling, and the noise that it was not a place for girls or women, and she kept her head lowered and her eyes on the ground, hoping not to be noticed and grabbed again. "There's Branch." She pointed at the little dog, who recognized her and wagged his crooked stub of a tail. "Matt will be nearby." With Thomas beside her, she pushed her way through and found him still prancing with his spear. Its sharp point was dangerously close to the other tykes. "Matt!" she called in a scolding voice. He saw her, waved, and grinned. "I'm Maddie now," he called. Exasperated, Kira grabbed the spear shaft just above his hand. "You won't be 2 syllables for a long time, Matt," she said. "Thomas, take this." She removed the spear from Matt's grasp and handed it carefully to the carver. "Yes, I be," Matt said, laughing and proud. "Looky here, I've got me a manly pelt." The little boy raised both his arms above his head to show her his joke. Kira looked. His underarms were thick with some kind of growth. "What is that?" she asked him. Then she wrinkled her nose. "It smells terrible." She touched it, pulled some away, and began to laugh. "Matt, that's swamp grass. It's awful stuff. What do you mean plastering yourself with it?" She could see that he'd smeared it on his chest as well. Thomas handed the spear to a man who grabbed it eagerly. He looked down at Matt, who was wiggling under Kira's hands on his shoulders. "You look like a beast boy. What do you say, Kira? I think it's time we showed Matt the bathroom. Shall we clean him up and wash his second syllable away?" At the word wash, Matt wiggled harder, trying to get free. But Thomas and Kira both held him, and finally he allowed Thomas to pick him up and carry him on his shoulders, towering over the crowd. Now that the dangerous fascination of the spear was gone, Matt's group of young admirers dispersed. Kira could hear Matt calling from his perch above the noisy, shoving men. "Looky here at the beast boy!" No one looked or cared. She found Branch underfoot and picked him up to keep him safe from so many trampling feet. Carrying the dog tucked under her free arm, Kira leaned on her stick and followed Thomas. They edged their way around the crowd and back into the quiet of the building's corridors. Kira listened, laughing, to the wails and whimpers as Thomas mercilessly scrubbed both Matt and Branch in his bathroom tub. "Not me hairs, too!" Matt howled in protest as Thomas poured water over his tangled mop of hair. "You're drowning me!" Finally, with Matt pink-faced and subdued, his washed hair toweled into a halo, and his clean body wrapped in a blanket, they shared their meal. Branch shook himself briskly as if he had just played in the stream, then settled himself on the floor and nibbled at scraps they handed to him. Matt sniffed warily at his own hand and grimaced. "That soapy's horrid awful," he said. "But I like the food," he added, and filled his plate again. After dinner, Kira brushed his hair while he complained loudly. Then she held a mirror for him. Mirrors had been new to her, too, when she came here to live, and they gave an image different from the stream reflection that she had known that had been all she had known of herself. Matt examined his own image with interest, wrinkling his nose and raising his eyebrows. He showed his teeth, growled at the mirror, and startled Branch, who was sleeping under the table. "I be so fierce," Matt announced smugly. "You'd have drowned me, but I fought so fierce." Finally, they redressed him in his raggedy clothing. He looked down at himself. Then he reached suddenly for the leather thong around Kira's neck. "Gimme," he said. She pulled back, annoyed. "Don't, Matt," she told him and pulled her necklace loose from his hand. "Don't grab. If you want something, you should ask." "Gimme isn't ask," he pointed out, puzzled. "No, it isn't. You should learn some manners. Anyway," Kira added, "you can't have it. I told you it was special." "A gift," Matt said. "Yes, a gift from my father to my mother." "So she'd like him best." Kira laughed. "Maybe so, but she already liked him best." "I want a gift. I'd never be having one." Laughing, Thomas and Kira gave him the smooth bar of soap, which he tucked solemnly into his pocket. Then they turned him loose. By now the men and spears were gone. They watched from the window as the small figure followed by his dog crossed the deserted plaza and disappeared into the night. Alone with Thomas, Kira tried to explain the warning that had come to her from the cloth. "It creates a feeling in my hand," she explained hesitantly. "Look." She took it from her pocket and held it toward the light. But it was still now. She could feel a kind of comfort and silence from it, nothing like the tension that had stirred it earlier. But she felt disappointed that now it seemed no more than a scrap of cloth. She wanted Thomas to understand. She sighed. "I'm sorry," she said. "It seems lifeless now, lifeless, I know, but there are times." Thomas nodded. "Perhaps the feeling is for you alone," he said. "Here, I'll show you my bit of wood." He went to the shelf above the table where he kept his tools and took down a piece of light-colored pine, small enough to fit into the palm of his hand. Kira could see that it was intricately decorated with carved designs that interwove around it in complicated curves. "You carved this when you were just a tyke?" she asked him in surprise. She had never seen anything so extraordinary. The boxes and ornaments that were on his work table, beautiful in their own way, were much simpler than this small piece. Thomas shook his head. "I began to," he explained. "I was learning to use the tools. I began to try them on this small chunk of wood that had been discarded, and it—" He hesitated. He stared at the piece of wood as if it mystified him still. "It carved itself?" Kira asked. "It did. It seemed to, at least. It was the same for me with the cloth. It's why I understand the way the cloth speaks to you. The wood speaks in the same way. I can feel it in my hand. Sometimes it—" "Warned you?" Kira asked, remembering how the cloth had seemed to tense and tremble when she saw Matt holding the spear. Thomas nodded. "And calms me," he added. "When I came here so young, sometimes I was very lonely and frightened, but the feel of the wood was calming. Yes, the cloth is soothing at times, too. I was fearful here at first, the same as you, when everything was so new. But when I held the scrap, I felt assured." She thought for a moment, trying to picture what this life in the edifice must have been like for Thomas, brought here very young. I think it's easier for me because I'm not alone, as you were, she told him. Jameson comes every day to look at my work, and I have you just down the corridor. The two friends sat silently for a moment. Then Kira replaced the cloth. All right, calm down. Here we go. Let's see. Then Kira replaced the cloth in her pocket and rose from her chair. I must go to my room, she said. There's so much to do. Thank you for helping me with Matt, she added. He's a naughty tyke, isn't he? Thomas, returning his carved piece to the shelf, agreed with a grin. Horrid naughty, he said, and they laughed together with affection for their little friend. All right. That will bring our reading to a close this evening. Thank you all so very much for joining me. As always, it is a pleasure being able to read for you. I will most likely have this uploaded tomorrow. I will try and see if I can do it first thing in the morning. But again, ever since that weird thing where I just had to redo one of the reads. I will try my best to get it uploaded either tomorrow or Wednesday. So, I hope you guys have a fantastic week. Stay hydrated, stay safe, and if you're in a place where they're having pretty hard storms, just be careful if you have to travel. So, until then, I'll see you later.